The projector screen lit up behind me as I stood at the altar, my hand trembling slightly as I reached for the remote control hidden in my bouquet. 200 guests watched expectantly, including my cheating fiancé Marcus and my backstabbing sister Chloe, both sitting in the front row with practiced smiles. They had no idea that instead of our romantic engagement photos, they were about to see explicit evidence of their year-long affair projected in high definition for everyone to witness. I pressed play, and the first image flashed across the screen. Marcus and Chloe kissing passionately in what was supposed to be our future marital bed. The collective gasp from our family and friends was deafening, but I barely heard it over the sound of my own heart hammering in my chest. This was it. The moment I'd been planning for 3 months, ever since I died in that car crash, and somehow been given a second chance to live this nightmare all over again. The irony wasn't lost on me that my wedding day, what should have been the happiest day of my life, had become my day of reckoning. But as I watched my sister's face drain of all color and Marcus stumble backward in shock, I felt a surge of satisfaction so intense it nearly brought me to my tears. Not tears of sorrow this time, but tears of pure, vindicated rage. You see, I'd lived through this humiliation once before. In my previous life, I discovered their affair 3 years too late, on the day I found Chloe wearing my grandmother's ring, the one Marcus had supposedly lost. By then, they'd already drained my trust fund, sold my childhood home behind my back, and were planning to have me committed so they could access the rest of my inheritance. I died that night, alone and broken, in a car accident that was probably no accident at all. But somehow, some way, I'd woken up on my 25th birthday, exactly 2 years before my wedding day. 2 years to plan, to prepare, and to ensure that this time justice would be served cold. The second photo appeared on screen. Chloe in my engagement dress, the one she'd insisted on borrowing for a photo shoot. Except in this picture, Marcus was slowly unzipping it while she laughed. The timestamp showed it was taken just 3 days after our engagement party while I was visiting our grandmother in the hospital. The crowd was in chaos now. My mother had gone completely white and was gripping the pew in front of her. Marcus's parents looked like they wanted to disappear into the floor. But I kept my eyes fixed on my targets, watching as the reality of their exposure sank in. Marcus finally found his voice. "Emma, please, I can explain." "Explain what?" I said sweetly, clicking to the next image. This one showed them in his office where he worked as a financial advisor, going through what were clearly my bank statements. "Explain how you've been systematically stealing from me for over a year? Or explain how you convinced my own sister to help you?" Chloe shot to her feet, her face now flushed red with humiliation and rage. "Emma, you don't understand." "Oh, but I do," I interrupted, advancing the slideshow again. The next image was a screenshot of text messages between them, planning how to increase the dose of the anxiety medication they'd been secretly giving me, the medication that had been making me dizzy, confused, and increasingly dependent on them for everything. I understand perfectly. In fact, I understand so much more than you think. The real beauty of having lived through this betrayal once before was that I knew all their moves in advance. I knew that Marcus had been drugging my coffee with anxiety medication to make me seem unstable. I knew that Chloe had been gradually isolating me from my friends by spreading rumors about my mental health issues. I knew that they'd already forged my signature on documents transferring my trust fund into Marcus's name, planning to complete the theft after our marriage. But this time, I'd been ready for all of it. The slideshow continued, each image more damning than the last. Photos of them at romantic dinners while I thought Marcus was working late. Videos of them mocking me, calling me pathetic and too trusting for my own good. Screenshots of their plans to have me institutionalized after the wedding, complete with a fake psychiatric evaluation they'd already purchased. By the time I reached the final image, a photo of them burning my grandmother's letters, the ones where she'd warned me about trusting people too easily, my sister was sobbing hysterically, and Marcus looked like he might actually pass out. But I wasn't done, not even close. "The funny thing is," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the stunned silence, "in another life, you two actually succeeded. You destroyed me so completely that I barely knew who I was anymore. You took everything I had, everyone I loved, and left me with nothing but doubt and fear." I walked down from the altar, still holding the remote, still clicking through additional evidence I'd gathered. Bank records showing the systematic theft, audio recordings of them planning my downward spiral, video footage from the private investigator I'd hired showing them celebrating their success at ruining my life. But here's what you didn't count on, I continued, my voice growing stronger with each word. Sometimes, the universe gives you a second chance. Sometimes you get to come back and do things differently. The crowd was completely silent now, hanging on every word. Even the children had stopped fidgeting, sensing the gravity of what was unfolding. Marcus finally seemed to shake off his shock and tried to approach me. Emma, please, let's talk about this privately. This isn't private, I laughed, a sound with no humor in it whatsoever. Like how you privately seduced my sister while I was caring for our dying grandmother. Like how you privately stole my inheritance while pretending to love me. Like how you privately planned to have me committed so you could live happily ever after with my money and my family. I clicked to a new section of the slideshow, one that even Marcus and Chloe hadn't expected. Photos and documents I'd obtained through my own investigation over the past 2 years showing that this wasn't their first con. Marcus had done this before to at least 3 other women. And Chloe? She'd been his accomplice for longer than I'd realized, helping him identify and manipulate wealthy, vulnerable targets. You see, when you get a second chance at life, you don't just get to redo your own choices. You get to see the bigger picture. And the bigger picture is that you two are career criminals who have been systematically destroying lives for years. The images now showed Marcus's previous victims: Sarah Chen, who'd lost her family's restaurant; Jennifer Martinez, who'd ended up homeless after he'd convinced her to sign over her property; Ashley Thompson, who'd actually succeeded in committing suicide after he'd driven her to a complete breakdown. My mother gasped as she recognized Ashley's name. She'd been my college roommate, and her death had devastated me in my previous life. Now I knew why she'd really died and who was responsible. The police are already investigating the pattern, I announced, savoring the look of pure terror that crossed both their faces. Turns out, when you report financial crimes with this much evidence, they take it very seriously, especially when it involves forgery, fraud, and conspiracy across multiple victims. Marcus tried one last desperate play. You're clearly having some kind of breakdown, Emma. None of this makes sense. We need to get you help. Help? I smiled and clicked to the final section of my slideshow. Oh, I've already gotten all the help I need. The screen now showed legal documents, restraining orders, financial freezes on all accounts associated with Marcus or Chloe. And, most importantly, the arrest warrants that had been issued this morning, timed to be executed right after my little presentation. As if on cue, I heard the church doors open and the sound of footsteps on the marble floor. Detective Morrison, whom I'd been working with for months, appeared at the back of the church with several officers. Marcus Henderson and Chloe Morrison. Detective Morrison called out clearly. You're under arrest for financial fraud, conspiracy, and identity theft. The next few minutes were pure chaos. Marcus tried to run but was tackled by one of the officers before he made it 3 steps. Chloe collapsed completely, sobbing and babbling about how it was all Marcus's idea, how she'd never meant for it to go so far. My mother rushed to me, tears streaming down her face. Emma, oh my God, I'm so sorry. I had no idea. I know, Mom, I said, finally allowing myself to feel something other than cold fury. None of you did. They were very good at what they did. As they led Marcus and Chloe away in handcuffs, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders that I'd been carrying for longer than anyone could imagine. The weight of betrayal, of manipulation, of being made to feel like I was losing my mind. But I wasn't done yet. Having lived through their destruction once before, I'd learned that justice wasn't just about punishment. It was about prevention. And I had one more surprise for my guests. Before everyone leaves, I announced, my voice carrying clearly over the murmur of shocked conversations, I want you all to know that this experience has taught me something valuable about the importance of protecting the people we love from predators like these. I gestured to my maid of honor, my best friend Jessica, who stepped forward with a stack of papers. I've established the Ashley Thompson Foundation for Financial Abuse Victims, I continued, named after my college roommate who died because of people like Marcus and Chloe. every guest here today is receiving information about how to recognize the warning signs of financial manipulation and emotional abuse. The irony was perfect. Marcus and Chloe had planned to use my wedding as the final step in their con, the moment when they'd gain legal access to everything I owned. Instead, it had become the launch of an organization dedicated to stopping people exactly like them. As the guests began to file out, many stopping to hug me or express their shock and support, I remained standing at the altar, not as a bride, but as a survivor. Someone who'd been given an impossible second chance and had used it not just for revenge, but for justice. Detective Morrison approached me as the crowd thinned out. "That was quite a presentation, Miss Morrison. I have to ask, how did you manage to gather all this evidence? Some of these photos and recordings go back months before you officially hired us." I smiled, thinking about how to explain something that no one would ever believe. "Let's just say I had a very strong intuition about what I was looking for." He nodded, accepting the non-answer. "Well, your intuition was remarkably accurate. We've already connected them to at least 5 other victims, and I suspect there will be more. The evidence you provided is going to put them away for a very long time." After he left, I found myself alone in the church for the first time all day. The wedding decorations, flowers, ribbons, candles, suddenly seemed absurd, like props in a play that had taken an unexpected turn. But as I looked at the projector screen, still displaying the legal documents that had sealed Marcus and Chloe's fate, I realized that this had been exactly the wedding I'd needed. Not a celebration of a false love, but a celebration of truth, justice, and the power of second chances. My phone buzzed with a text from my lawyer. "Preliminary hearing set for next week. Based on the evidence, prosecutors are confident about convictions on all major charges. Your trust fund has been fully recovered and returned to your control." I smiled, thinking about all the things I could do with that money now. Not just for myself, but for other victims like Ashley. Like the previous version of myself who died alone and broken. 6 months later, I stood in a different church. Not as a bride this time, but as a witness. Jennifer Martinez, one of Marcus's previous victims, was getting married to a man who actually loved her. She'd testified at Marcus's trial, helping to secure his conviction, and had slowly rebuilt her life with the help of the foundation. Marcus had been sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. Chloe got 12 years as a co-conspirator. Both were also facing civil suits from their other victims, ensuring they'd never be able to rebuild their criminal enterprise. The foundation had grown beyond anything I'd imagined. We'd helped over 100 victims in just 6 months, providing legal assistance, financial planning, and emotional support to people who'd been targeted by financial predators. But perhaps the most satisfying part was the letter I'd received from Ashley Thompson's parents. They'd seen the news coverage of Marcus's arrest and had reached out to thank me for finally bringing their daughter's killer to justice. Because that's what he was. He might not have physically pushed Ashley off that bridge, but he'd driven her to it just as surely as if he had. As I watched Jennifer walk down the aisle towards someone who truly loved her, I thought about the strange path that had led me here. Death, rebirth, revenge, and ultimately, redemption. Not just for myself, but for everyone who'd been hurt by people like Marcus and Chloe. My phone buzzed with another text, this one from my new boyfriend David, a fellow lawyer I'd met while setting up the foundation. Unlike Marcus, David had been completely upfront about his financial situation, his past relationships, and his intentions. He'd even insisted on a background check when I'd mentioned my trust issues, laughing that he'd rather be over-investigated than under-trusted. "Dinner tonight?" his text read. "I want to hear about the presentation you're giving next week." I was scheduled to speak at a conference about financial abuse, sharing my story and the warning signs that others should watch for. It would be the first time I'd publicly discussed what had happened, though obviously I'd be leaving out the more supernatural aspects of my experience. "Absolutely," I texted back. "But fair warning, I'm in a really good mood today, so I might actually smile at your terrible jokes." A smile? From the Ice Queen of Justice? I'd better bring my camera. I laughed, something I'd done more in the past 6 months than in the entire 2 years leading up to my wedding day. It was amazing how much lighter life felt when you weren't being systematically poisoned and gaslighted by the people closest to you. As Jennifer and her new husband exchanged vows, I found myself thinking about the concept of second chances. Not everyone gets the literal second chance I'd somehow been given, but everyone deserves the opportunity to rebuild after betrayal, to find love after manipulation, to discover strength after abuse. That's what the foundation was really about, giving people the tools and support they needed to create their own second chances, to recognize the warning signs I'd missed the first time around, to trust their instincts when something felt wrong, to know that they deserved better than being treated as a mark in someone else's con game. The reception afterward was everything my own wedding reception should have been: joyful, genuine, full of people who actually cared about each other. Jennifer pulled me aside during the dancing, tears in her eyes. "I don't know how to thank you," she said. "6 months ago, I was living in my car, convinced that I was worthless and that everything that happened was my fault. Now, look at me." She gestured around the beautiful reception hall at her new husband, who was chatting animatedly with her parents, at the life she'd rebuilt from nothing. "You don't need to thank me," I told her. "You did all the hard work. I just helped connect you with the resources you needed." "But if you hadn't exposed Marcus, if you hadn't started the foundation?" She shook her head. "I would still be out there, probably being victimized by someone else just like him." It was true, and it was exactly why I'd chosen to use my impossible second chance the way I had. I could have simply avoided Marcus and Chloe, lived a quiet life somewhere else, and let them continue destroying other people. Instead, I'd chosen to stop them permanently and help their previous victims heal. As the evening wound down, I found myself standing outside the reception hall, looking up at the stars. A year ago, in both timelines, I'd been preparing for a wedding that would have destroyed my life. Tonight, I was celebrating someone else's genuine happiness while planning my next move and building something meaningful. My phone rang, and I smiled when I saw the caller ID. Detective Morrison. "Working late again, Detective?" "Always, when it comes to cases like these. I wanted to give you an update. We just arrested 2 more people who were working with Marcus and Chloe. Turns out their network was even bigger than we thought." I wasn't surprised. People like them rarely worked alone, and my unique insight into their methods had helped the investigation uncover connections that might have been missed otherwise. "How many victims total now?" I asked. 37 that we've confirmed, with damages totaling over $2 million. But here's the really good news. Because of the evidence you helped us gather, we're going to be able to recover most of the stolen funds. The Foundation's legal team has been incredible to work with. I smiled, thinking about the team of lawyers who'd volunteered their time to help victims navigate the complex process of recovering stolen assets. David had been the one to organize them, understanding instinctively that justice meant more than just putting criminals in prison. "There's something else," Detective Morrison continued. "We've been contacted by the FBI. They want to use your case as a model for a national task force on financial abuse. Your story and the Foundation's work could help protect thousands of people." After I hung up, I stood in the cool evening air for a few more minutes, processing the magnitude of what had grown from my decision to fight back instead of just running away. A national task force, thousands of potential victims protected, a network of predators dismantled. It made me wonder about the cosmic forces that had given me this second chance. Had it been random? Or had something, the universe, fate, Ashley's spirit, known that I would use the opportunity not just for personal revenge, but for widespread justice? I'd never know for sure, and I'd stop trying to figure it out. What mattered was that I'd been given an opportunity, and I'd made the most of it. David appeared beside me, having arrived to pick me up as promised. "How was the wedding?" he asked, wrapping his arms around me from behind. "Perfect," I said, leaning back against him. "Absolutely perfect." "And how are you feeling about speaking at the conference next week?" I considered the question seriously. In a few days, I'd be standing in front of hundreds of financial professionals, law enforcement officers, and victim advocates, telling them about the most traumatic and transformative experience of my life, or lives, as the case may be. Nervous, I admitted, but ready. People need to hear this story. They need to know how sophisticated these predators can be, and how many victims never report what happens to them because they're too ashamed or confused. And they need to know that there's hope, David added, that recovery is possible, and that they're not alone. That was exactly it. In my first life, I died thinking I was the only person who'd ever been fooled so completely by someone I trusted. I'd died believing that I was weak, stupid, and unworthy of love. Now I knew that I'd been targeted specifically because I was kind, trusting, and generous, qualities that predators actively sought out in their victims. We drove home in comfortable silence, and I found myself thinking about the wedding dress hanging in my closet. The one I'd never gotten to wear because my actual wedding day had become something else entirely. I'd thought about donating it or throwing it away, but something had stopped me. Maybe because it represented more than just a failed relationship. It represented the person I'd been before I learned to fight back. Innocent, trusting, believing in happily ever after. That person hadn't been weak. She'd been hopeful, and while I'd gained strength and wisdom through my trials, I didn't want to lose that hope entirely. "David," I said as we pulled into my driveway, "how would you feel about a very small, very private wedding sometime in the future? Nothing fancy, just close friends and family." He turned to look at me, his expression serious. "Are you proposing to me, Emma Morrison?" "Maybe," I said, grinning. "But I should warn you, I have trust issues, a complicated past, and a tendency to overthink everything. I also have excellent instincts about people's motivations, a background check on file, and a nonprofit organization that takes up most of my free time," I continued. "And," I added, getting out of the car and walking toward the house, "I once completely destroyed 2 career criminals at my own wedding reception, so I'm probably not the easiest person to be in a relationship with." David followed me, laughing. "Are you trying to talk me out of this?" "I'm trying to make sure you know what you're getting into." He caught up to me at the front door, taking my hands in his. "What I'm getting into is a relationship with the strongest, most remarkable woman I've ever met. Someone who turned the worst experience of her life into a force for protecting other people. Someone who chose justice over revenge, even when revenge would have been easier." I looked into his eyes, seeing nothing but sincerity and love. No hidden agendas, no calculated manipulation, no secret plans to destroy my life for financial gain. "In that case," I said, "yes, I'm absolutely proposing to you." A year later, I did wear that wedding dress after all, in a small ceremony in the same church where I'd exposed Marcus and Chloe, surrounded by the people who actually mattered to me. Jennifer was my maid of honor, and several other foundation beneficiaries were in attendance. Detective Morrison walked me down the aisle, having become something of a father figure to me over the months we'd worked together. There was no slideshow this time, just flowers, music, and the simple joy of 2 people who'd found each other and chosen to build something together. During my vows, I spoke about second chances, how rare and precious they are, and how important it is to use them wisely. I talked about learning to trust again after betrayal, and about the difference between healthy love and manipulation. But mostly, I talked about hope. How even in the darkest moments, when everything seems lost and everyone seems false, there's still the possibility of redemption, justice, and genuine happiness. As David and I exchanged rings, I caught sight of the memorial candle we'd lit for Ashley Thompson. Her parents had sent their blessing for the ceremony, saying they were grateful that her story had helped prevent others from suffering the same fate. The reception was everything my first wedding reception should have been: small, intimate, and full of people who genuinely cared about each other's happiness. We danced to songs that actually meant something to us, ate food we'd chosen together, and celebrated a love that was built on honesty and mutual respect. Late in the evening, as the party was winding down, I stepped outside for a moment of quiet reflection. 2 years ago, I'd stood in a similar spot, preparing for a wedding that would have destroyed my life. Tonight, I was celebrating a marriage that felt like a new beginning. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Saw the news about your wedding? Congratulations. You deserved better than what he gave you. Thank you for stopping him. Sarah." Sarah Chen, one of Marcus's previous victims. She'd rebuilt her family's restaurant with help from the foundation's business recovery program and was now thriving again. Similar messages had been arriving all day from victims I'd helped, from professionals who'd attended my conference presentations, from strangers who'd heard my story and found the courage to leave their own abusive situations. That's when it hit me. This had never really been about revenge at all. Even in those first moments when I'd stood at the altar with the remote control in my hand, even when I'd felt that surge of vindicated rage, it had been about justice. About making sure that Marcus and Chloe could never hurt anyone else the way they'd hurt me, Ashley, and so many others. The revenge had been personal, but the justice had been universal. David found me a few minutes later, loosening his tie with a satisfied smile. "Penny for your thoughts, Mrs. Carson?" "Just thinking about how strange life is," I said, taking his hand. 2 years ago, I was in the worst situation of my life. Now, I'm in the best. Any regrets? I considered the question seriously. Did I regret the pain, the betrayal, the humiliation? Did I regret the months of planning my wedding day revenge? Did I regret the way my story had become public, making me something of a poster child for financial abuse recovery? None, I said finally. Every terrible thing that happened led to something good. Ashley's death led to the foundation. Marcus and Chloe's betrayal led to their network being exposed. My pain led to other people's healing. And, I added, standing on my tiptoes to kiss him, it led to this. To us. To a marriage based on truth instead of lies. As we walked back into the reception together, I thought about the cosmic mathematics of second chances. How one woman's impossible return from death had rippled outward to affect dozens of lives, prevent countless crimes, and create something lasting and meaningful. The foundation now had offices in 12 states and had helped over 1,000 victims recover from financial abuse. The FBI task force had resulted in major arrests across the country. The conference presentations had trained thousands of professionals to recognize and respond to financial predators. But perhaps most importantly, I'd learned that justice isn't just about punishment. It's about prevention, healing, and hope. It's about making sure that the next person who finds themselves in an impossible situation knows they're not alone, they're not weak, and they deserve better. 5 years later, as I stood in front of Congress testifying in favor of stronger financial abuse prevention laws, I thought about that moment when I'd first pressed play on my wedding day slideshow. I'd thought I was just exposing two criminals. I'd had no idea I was starting a movement. The Ashley Thompson Financial Abuse Prevention Act passed unanimously, requiring financial institutions to implement new safeguards and providing federal funding for victim services. When the president signed it into law, Ashley's parents were there, along with hundreds of survivors and advocates. "This is what justice looks like," Ashley's mother said to me afterward. "Not just punishment for the people who hurt our loved ones, but protection for the people who come after." She was right. Real justice wasn't about making the guilty suffer. It was about making sure the innocent were protected. It was about turning personal pain into universal progress. That night, David and I sat in our living room watching the news coverage of the bill signing. Our son, 3-year-old Ashley Carson, named for the young woman whose death had started it all, was asleep upstairs, blissfully unaware that he was growing up in a world that was slightly safer than the one his mother had inherited. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't gotten that second chance?" David asked, his arm around my shoulders. I considered the question seriously. In the timeline where I died in that car crash, Marcus and Chloe would have gotten away with their crimes. They would have moved on to new victims, refined their techniques, and probably destroyed dozens more lives. The foundation wouldn't exist. The task force wouldn't exist. The new law wouldn't exist. I think about it sometimes, I admitted. But then I remember that we'll never really know if it was supernatural intervention or just incredible luck. What matters is what we did with the opportunity. And what we're still doing with it, David added. He was right. The work wasn't finished. It would never be finished, as long as there were predators targeting vulnerable people and victims who needed support and justice. But that was okay. I'd learned that some battles are worth fighting for a lifetime. Some causes are worth dedicating your existence to. And sometimes, the worst thing that happens to you becomes the best thing you can do for others. As I turned off the lights and headed upstairs to check on our son, I caught a glimpse of our wedding photo on the mantel. Not the chaotic disaster of my first wedding attempt, but the simple, joyful ceremony where David and I had promised to build a life together based on honesty, respect, and shared purpose. In the photo, we're both smiling. not the desperate, fake smiles I'd worn with Marcus, but genuine expressions of happiness and hope. Behind us, just barely visible, is the memorial candle for Ashley Thompson, representing all the victims whose stories had led to our mission. It was the perfect encapsulation of what my life had become: joy built on the foundation of justice, love grown from the soil of truth, and hope flowering in the wake of healing. I had been given the rarest gift imaginable, a second chance at life, and I'd used it to ensure that others wouldn't need what I'd needed. They wouldn't need to die and come back to get justice. They would have protection, support, and resources from the beginning. They would have what I'd fought to create: a world where predators like Marcus and Chloe couldn't operate in the shadows, where victims like Ashley and Jennifer and Sarah weren't alone, and where second chances came in the form of prevention rather than resurrection. That was my real wedding gift to myself and to the world: not revenge, but justice. Not just personal healing, but universal protection. Not just a happy ending for Emma Morrison, but a better beginning for everyone who came after. And as I tucked our son into his bed, kissing his forehead and whispering a promise that he would grow up in a world where people like his mother would be watching out for him, I knew that my second chance had been worth everything it had cost. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do with your life is make sure others don't have to live through what you survived. Sometimes the greatest love you can show the world is ensuring that your pain becomes someone else's protection. And sometimes the perfect wedding gift isn't what you receive on your special day, it's what you give to everyone who comes after.